Firstly, the determination of service of a person who is found to have entered government service on the strength of forged certificates, mark sheets, or degrees is not an action resting on an act of misconduct committed in the course of employment. The cessation of service occurs solely upon it being discovered and found that the person had fraudulently obtained employment under the state. The very entry into service is thus rendered void and nonest. It leads to the irresistible conclusion that the employee was never entitled to be in service. If the aforesaid be duly established, then the length of service rendered or the many years spent on that post are factors which not only pale into insignificance but are rendered wholly irrelevant. Secondly, it must necessarily be recognized that an allegation of fraud or fabrication of certificates and testimonials is a serious charge which must be lawfully established, since any action taken on the back of such an allegation would necessarily visit the person with serious civil consequences. It must be proceeded by the opportunity of hearing being afforded to the individual, enabling him to establish that the allegation of fraud or fabrication is incorrect. The only clarification which needs to be entered is that since and as already held, the action is not based on an act of misconduct, while the rules relating to disciplinary proceedings would not apply, the rudimentary principles of natural justice would have to be adhered to and followed. Full stop. Para. Lastly, it may be noted that a challenge to an order of recovery of salaries paid for services rendered in such cases is essentially an appeal for sympathetic consideration and a prayer for invocation of principles of equity. As was urged here, the challenge to the direction for recovery of salary was addressed on the basis of the petitioner having rendered service for many years and thus the impugned action liable to be struck down on equitable considerations. This court having conferred thoughtful consideration on the submission addressed on this score fails to find either merit in the submission or justification for upholding that plea for the following reasons. Undisputedly, the petitioner forged his testimonials in order to obtain employment under the state. That was a conscious and deliberate act on the part of the petitioner in order to illegally and undeservedly enter into government service. That employment was acquired by practicing fraud and the petitioner fabricating testimonials. Fraud, as has been often said, unravels the most solemn of acts. The appointment secured was honest and wide ab initio. In fact, the factum of that appointment cannot ever be countenanced in law.